Thank you all for coming this afternoon. My name is Mark Askey. I'm with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and I'll be your host, moderator. I promise not to tell any jokes. This session that you're at this afternoon has been organized by the Disaster Services Office of the Hands-On Network and the Corporation for the National and Community Services. Two people were particularly responsible for this: Kelly Bentz, Director of the Disaster Services for Hands-On, and Kelly DeGraff, Director of Disaster Services for CNCS, are committed to sustaining a collaborative effort with nonprofit agencies and with the federal partners. I appreciate their partnership. I appreciate working with both of them, and they're continuing to work with FEMA and the federal government on a national strategy for managing volunteers in times of disaster. So we really appreciate their partnership and the work and effort that they put in. On May 1st of 2010, President Barack Obama selected Admiral Allen to serve as the National Incident Commander for the unified response to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, a position he held concurrently while finishing his tenure as Commandant of the Coast Guard. In that position, Admiral Allen oversaw the response efforts to the worst oil disaster in U.S. history. Prior to that assignment, as Commandant, Admiral Allen served as Chief of Staff of the Coast Guard. During his tenure in that position in 2005, he was designated as the principal federal official for the U.S. government's response and recovery operations in the aftermath of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in the Gulf Coast.
If you take a look at the complicated world that we live in right now, with population increasing, the population densities around coastal areas, issues related to climate change, the potential increases in water levels, and I think you've seen just this spring and over the last year the different types of very dramatic weather swings that we've had. We are not looking at any simpler world than we grew up in. In fact, it's going to become more complex. We're going to be looking at more events that are going to be occurring. They're going to be testing the preparedness of our country, state and local governments and individuals moving forward. But that's going to happen in a very, very different environment than I grew up in, and it's been changing rapidly in the last 5 or 10 years. And it has to do with the 24-hour media cycle that we live in, the ubiquity of information that's available to everybody, access to the internet, to social media, the ability to actually have people inject themselves into an actual operation while it's going on. And I talked to a lot of people, and they're saying, yeah, I understand, but we have our procedures. And I said, no, you don't understand. We have to figure out a way to talk about public participation in these events, because it's going to happen whether we want it to or not. John Holdren is a science and technology advisor to the president. He gives a great presentation on climate change. And when he's done, you have no doubt in your mind that climate's changing. You can believe what you want to believe. But he says we have 3 ways to deal with climate change. 3 ways. We can suffer, we can adapt, or we can manage. I submit to you today that the changes in our external sociological environment, the media, the internet, access, the things that allow and enable public participation are the equivalent of climate change in our sociological environment. And I don't think there's any debate about it. They're like a feature of the weather. They are, and we need to take them into account and deal with it. And I would submit to you we have 3 strategies. We can suffer, we can adapt, or we can manage. The reason I thank you for being here today, you guys are in the manage category. So you should give yourselves a hand, all right? Now, having said that, there are some issues with public participation. And let's start with the media and the internet environment. Let's move down to actually what some of you do day to day, and then we look forward to getting into a really good discussion here. The good news is there is no barrier to entry in the internet. The bad news is there's no barrier to entry on the internet. And as I tell groups that I talk to around the country, anything you put on the internet today, and I think you all know this, is the sociological equivalent of non-biodegradable plastic. The internet is forever. These are our arrowheads. Somebody's gonna be looking through a dump 100 years from now, they're gonna find a disc that says that Alan Speed. Who's this idiot? You know, we're there, okay? So we need to understand that because it affects transparency, communication, outreach, and being able to create communities of interest. But most of all, it will allow us, if we use it correctly, to create unity of effort. In any event I've ever been involved in, there's only one overarching thing you're trying to achieve, and that's unity of effort. Because there is no complex problem, whether it's a long-term programmatic issue like childhood nutrition or dealing with a crisis, hurricane or an oil spill or tsunami, that any particular agency, individual, or organization owns the entire means to fix the problem. Nobody can do anything by themselves anymore. Nobody. That puts a real premium on being able to collaborate, network, and partner. And one of the ways you can do that is through the media. And if you don't do it, people are going to collaborate, network, and partner through the media anyway.
If we could talk about opportunities that you see for engaging the public in all phases of disaster, response, recovery, preparedness, mitigation, what are some of the things that you see are the opportunities for engaging the public?
One, I have to say, we have absolutely the best network of voluntary organizations responding to disasters and participating in preparedness in the entire world. We actually do some work with our State Department and bring our model, our VOAD model, to other governments who are trying to think about how to break down barriers between folks of different religious backgrounds and beliefs. And you'd be surprised at how innovative it is across the world. Folks just aren't thinking about engaging faith-based and community-based organizations in the way that we do here in the United States. But I think there's additional opportunity to expand in this space, particularly with organizations that are not a part of traditional preparedness and response infrastructure. In this administration, we opened up a faith-based office at FEMA, and their job was to support the existing organizations that are deeply integrated into our response and preparedness infrastructure, but also to bring new groups in. What we found in the aftermath of some early events in this administration was that there were some organizations that quite simply have always sort of fallen outside of the response system. For example, after the floods in Nashville, Tennessee, a couple of years ago, we saw that the Jewish community in Nashville wasn't really plugged into the existing response structure. And so myself and David Myers and some other folks from FEMA flew down and went to the JCC, the Jewish Community Center, and sort of brought them in and told them how they can make contact with their VOAD and really participate. We see that often in minority faith communities as well. We saw that after the tornadoes in Alabama. So I think there's a real possibility for expansion with faith traditions that aren't a part of the existing response structure.
In order to really understand exactly how the public can play a role, CalEMA can focus primarily on getting those first responders and other kinds of resources down on the ground as they come to learn through our sets of eyes and ears what other resources might be able to lend a hand. And yet let us, as kind of experts in the kind of the community world, be able to gather that information. When the Admiral, who, can I just say, I was so wowed by your leadership. Your leadership, are you guys blown away? Just... I have to, like, of course, go off script and just say it's refreshing just to have your strength and your clarity of vision, and we need you.
The majority of the resources, the planning, and the exercising that is targeted towards the public in terms of disaster preparedness, response, and recovery does not match up with the fact that disaster volunteers add more in terms of capacity with regard to preparing for responding to disasters, and sometimes that supports the official organizations and sometimes it supersedes it. So we really do need to figure out a way, and I think that the focus on the whole of community, I think, is a movement there, but we need to make sure that the resources are there and that there are long-term investments made, and that we don't just acknowledge the fact that the volunteers are additive, but how do we actually bring them in the fold? And how do we actually make sure that the planning and the resources line up?
You are showing by your presence here today that you care. I think one of the things that you can all take away is the notion of what personal responsibility is in these things for when you're talking to the folks that are in your organizations. And Alan's definition of resiliency in a community is their ability to withstand the entire cycle of something that happens, from being prepared to getting back to whatever that new normal might be. And to the extent you have pre-existing conditions that you know will be exacerbated by an event, I think there's a duty out there to take care of that, because to the extent that they exist, that is the equivalent of a person with a low immune system getting sick. So healthy communities are resilient communities. The sets of issues you have locally that you deal with are all going to be different. But I would just charge you all as leaders to look at growing individual competencies that relate to help folks be compliant with response and recovery and preparedness, and look at those areas of vulnerabilities and start attacking those ahead of time, because that will be the way that you will create the most effective response to do away with the need before the event occurs. And you can do a lot of good in that regard. So thank you very much for being with us here today.